Hello again, and welcome back to the 6-5 Summit. I'm Shelley Kramer, one of the founding partners of Futurum Research, and on behalf of all of us at Futurum and More Insights, we're really glad to have you. In this fireside chat discussion, Futurum's Daniel Newman sits down with Jason Shepard from ZEDEDA, and they talk about what it takes to build an ecosystem for digital transformation and why that's so critically important moving forward. ZEDEDA is a leader in IoT edge orchestration, delivering visibility, control, and security for the distributed enterprise. IoT edge solutions require a diverse mix of technologies and domain expertise, and ZEDEDA's open, vendor-agnostic framework is exactly what customers need who are looking for agility as well as the ability to future-proof their organizations. I think you're really going to enjoy what Jason has to say, so let's get to it.
Jason Shepard, welcome to the 6-5 Summit. Really excited to have you here. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you for having me on. This is a great event.
Yeah, it's always exciting. You and I have worked together for a number of years before you joined ZEDEDA, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that because the work you were doing with Dell has certainly followed you a little bit.
Yeah.
But let's jump right in. I'm excited to have this discussion today, but we got to start with the important stuff. What's up with that guitar behind you? I just got to ask one personal question.
Oh, yeah. No, I always joke that when you move to Austin, they just give you a bunch of instruments. Hey, you want a vintage guitar? Cool. Here, have it. I play music for fun, and that's an old Gibson guitar that I bought a couple years back. It just sounds amazing. So just got a bunch. There's a lot more over here too. So
yeah, I would have you turn your camera, but the production team would probably be really flustered if I did that. So don't turn the camera. But no, I think that's super fascinating. One of the things from doing an event like this I've learned a lot is everyone's at home. So there's no real studio, and we've gotten to see the inside of people's homes. So it's kind of like cribs for big tech, because like we have all these tech folks, and we're in many of their homes, and you see what type of setting and how some have really decked out a studio, and how others have sort of. In your case, it's a studio, not necessarily for video and podcasting, but for music. But I just had to ask because I am a music guy. I grew up playing the piano, so I've tried playing guitar for many years, but it never worked out quite as well for me. My fingers tend to do better on the keys than the strings, and that's just
because I'm the opposite. Yeah, sorry, the piano I can't comprehend, but guitar no problem. Speaking of cribs, we could, if we had the time, I could go show you the litter boxes like right behind me. Like,
don't. Yeah.
Our cat studio is right next to this one. So anyway,
that's awesome. So let's talk a little bit about ZEDEDA. ZEDEDA is not necessarily a household name yet, but you jumped over. You were very excited. Give everyone out there just a quick sort of 411. Is that still a thing? I don't know. Give them a little overview on ZEDEDA and what you're doing there.
Yeah. So I joined in November of last year to run our ecosystem effort and build that up. Been doing that for a while in the market, Dell Tech and open source, etc. Think of ZEDEDA is all about orchestration of apps. So we're not in the data path. Orchestration of apps and devices out in the wild. A really good way to look at it is based on this new taxonomy that we did through the LF Edge umbrella organization within Linux Foundation. You can find it online. Look for the LF Edge taxonomy. And it goes through this edge continuum of all of its different levels of compute. And it's not like there's an industrial edge, an enterprise edge, or thin and thick, or near and far, all these terms. What are the inherent technical trade-offs? And as you go down from the centralized clouds, you have trade-offs like, are you on a WAN or a LAN relative to the process? So is it time critical? Airbag, you'll never do it over a connection, even if it's 5G. And then you get further down, then you're like, are you in a physically secure data center or are you not? And then you get further down, and are you no longer capable of running apps like virtualized, containerized apps? So along that spectrum, there's a lot of great companies, VMware, Nutanix doing all this cool stuff, Volterra, like great stuff. But then once you get outside of the data center, in the wild, I don't have a network a firewall. I don't have physical security, but I can still run apps. That's what ZEDEDA does. We are like, we're complementary to a VMware where we are outside of a physically secure data center, any kind of compute deployed, gateways, servers, or otherwise, but still capable of running apps. We want to do for the IoT edge, which is that spectrum, what Android did for mobile in terms of having an open foundation. We have a cloud orchestration console. You choose your apps, you choose the hardware, you choose whatever. We just help you get it out there into the wild and make sure it's secure when you're not inside of a physically secure space. So very complementary to all the data center stuff. It's a very key part of edge compute that, outside of physically secure, still capable of running apps.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it kind of brings me to my next two questions, which I'm going to kind of try to combine into one because you touched on pieces of both. First of all, the IoT space, unlike the data center space, is sort of, like the Wild West. There's just a lot less standards. There's a ton of tools, technologies, data, all concurrently being deployed, created, collected. But there's so many players and so little standards. And so this sort of makes me start thinking about ecosystem and open ecosystems and closed ecosystems. All of this has its place, but where are we with all this? Because you have so much unregulated development within the IoT ecosystem. And then on top of that, you've got all these different ecosystems trying to be developed. How are companies, enterprises, communities, smart cities and smart grids and everyone that's going to try to benefit from this, how should they be thinking about it?
Right. Yeah, good question. So first off, whenever we draw the cloud to edge continuum, we always do it in landscape mode, just because it fits better on a page, and it's always the edge on the left, like literally the Wild West, the IoT edge, just where all that fragmentation is, and the cloud on the right, and it's much more centralized and stable these days. But all new markets start with a crazy amount of reinvention. Everybody comes out swinging. We're seeing that with AI right now, just like so many companies that are sort of duplicating efforts, a lot of innovation, but there's also a lot of reinvention. And so with IoT, I think we're starting to turn the corner of, when we started looking at this, I've been doing this since like 2015. 2014 is when the buzz really started picking up. It's not ready for prime time when people talk more about the platform than they talk about the outcome. Back in 2015, it was like, hey, buy my platform. And you're like, what am I supposed to do with it? I don't care, just buy it. You'll figure it out. Now everyone's talking about outcomes and whatnot. So as this has progressed over the past 5 years, as we've worked in open standards, bodies and tried to drive more standardization with projects that we've been doing in LF-Edge, like, I'd help get EdgeX Foundry started, and then Eve, the foundation for ZEDEDA, is within LF-Edge. That's part of the reason why I joined ZEDEDA, because I really believe an open model is important. In the end, as people start thinking about, closed versus open, where do I lie? Of course, everybody wants some level of stickiness. But the totally wrong thing to do for the real potential over time is to create a completely closed silo, which is so many platforms have done. The ultimate goal here is interconnected ecosystems. And as you build more and more trust across these networks, you're going to start seeing, within a smart city, the cars that communicate with each other, like as they approach an intersection. The brakes and the airbag will always be done in the vehicle, but you want to coordinate that through a small cell, thing, at that intersection. So there's infrastructure happening there, but that won't happen without standards or openness, some degree of openness. You'll see that happening where retailers increasingly cross over into the home, and you've got manufacturing supply chains that hit, various different elements across the various other elements. You must have open to get there. And so foundationally, you want some stickiness. You want to have like some aspects that are closed. But if you don't have a solution rooted in some level of open interoperability, imagine if one company owned the internet, wouldn't have panned out so well. You're going to have a challenge. So as people build out ecosystems, I think the net is we don't need 400 peanut butter platforms, because when you do everything, you really do one thing well. We need a bunch of people that do like one or two things well. They have like their go-to dance move, as I say, and then you build an entourage of different complementary partners around this more open, consistent foundation, security, orchestration, whatnot. The winners in the end will have necessarily unique hardware and software, not reinvented. Undifferentiated heavy lifting is why open source exists, and you stop that. Focus on value. Necessarily unique hardware and software, domain knowledge, really good services, not the 100th person this week to write an IoT platform. That is not valuable. It's all the stuff around that foundation that matters. So I think we're going to see a mix of open, there's open where it's completely open. There's closed open, meaning you can do anything you want with it as long as you pay me a lot of money for API access. And then there's like closed where it's like completely locked down. we're going to see the gamut, but it's going to have to lean more and more towards open to get to the real potential over time.
Which is actually a lot of what we're seeing in cloud right now. I mean, if you actually look at how public cloud and SaaS has sort of evolved to hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, we're seeing what's going on with OpenShift, with containers, with VMware, with Tanzu, and the ability to virtualize all your workloads and then place them in different clouds. I guess what I'm kind of saying is it looks like, if I'm reading you right and hearing you right, and we're actually going to see a similar evolution in IoT follow. And it's funny is we've talked a long time, Jason, about sort of centralized and distributed compute. And that's sort of where we're back to again, right? We're sort of back to we distributed, then we went centralized with cloud, and now we're going back to distributed. But in the end, for things to work, you need to standardize, but you also need to create an openness that allows these ecosystems that are created to really work concurrently with minimal intervention and interruption from closed standards and closed loops. And so it sounds to me like it could very much follow, where you're going to have these sort of workloads that look, feel, and operate a lot like what modernized data center architecture looks like, only not in the data center.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And the reason why, so we're seeing that evolution, as you said, in the cloud. We just kind of 5 years ago figured out what is the cloud, and now we're trying to figure out what the edge is. And it's not like the cloud's going away. It's distributed, and it's a complementary, symbiotic relationship across the edge to cloud continuum. There's different compute, but the edge is so important to be open, especially because all data originates from the edge, whether it's generated by people or devices. And you need to inject kind of that openness and trust into the data the moment it's created. Of course, it's all about watching for privacy, and that's part of the reason for edge computing. It's not just latency and bandwidth. There's security, autonomy elements. There's also a privacy element. Strip out publicly or personally identifiable information before it goes to the back end. But you need to maintain privacy, maintain IP protection and all that, but you also need to be able to kind of scale how you build these ecosystems. The real money is in business transformation, the whole digital transformation, buzzword. Like, it's super important. A lot of great use cases for IoT, for AI, whatever. But when you look at initial use cases, they're almost always about saving money, increasing safety, all good stuff. But when you're trying to make small improvements to save money, there's a practical lower limit. But when you're trying to make new money with completely new business models, anything goes, and the sky's the limit, and you can completely reinvent yourself. And this is why it's important. Don't architect yourself in a corner today, with a silo. You must be part of a bigger puzzle. And that's where this open ecosystem, the network effect, starts kicking in. I hear all the time from people like, oh, we just need to decide if we build or buy what you guys do. Okay, if you build it, you just created a bubble. Good luck. You are now not part of the party, which is this bigger open ecosystem and this network effect. If that's right for you, that's cool. But we think it's super important to have that hook, that to where you're part of something bigger. Like I said, like, imagine if you weren't part of the internet. Like, you go, I'm going to go create my own internet. Good luck.
Well, I mean, if you can build an ecosystem that's big enough that everyone begins to adopt it as the ecosystem, but there's only going to be one or two total that'll hold that level. So I think the point is for a lot of enterprise users that are sort of looking at closed architectures or specific designs within closed systems that are going to take IoT data. I think it's a short-term look, and I think that's the thing is, maybe in the short run, maybe if your systems aren't enabled for distributed compute the way, but as you're modernizing your architecture, that certainly wouldn't be the advice that you're going to get from any sort of architect or any sort of business consultant either, because essentially what we do know is data is exponential. It's being created in more and more vast places. I remember doing an interesting study with you before you left Dell Tech, where we actually looked at not just monetizing data for your current business, but really that the data you have is going to enable all kinds of new businesses. And if you don't recognize that and you're not collecting it and thinking about that data at a much more broad and holistic level upon the data, the data collection and creation process, you're never going to get that return from all that data that you're sitting on. So I have time for one more question. I'd love to have you dive into, Jason, and thank you so much for joining us here again. Such a always had great insights. I've enjoyed you've educated me on the edge from day one, and I've passed a lot of that knowledge along into the communities. But I've always heard you're a little bit of a buzzword killer, and as an analyst, one of the things that we get often stuck in the middle of is between using these buzzword architectures that are so coveted across the marketing stack, and then trying to balance it with pragmatic, practical, useful, accessible, and actionable information. So let's talk about the outcomes of all this. As every company's ecosystem starts taking flight, what should companies be focused on in terms of being able to identify if their investments in the edge and their IoT and their systems are going to bear fruit?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a lot of times when I start talking about this. So it's first off, focus on outcomes. Period. What's a use case? I mean, the number one and number two challenges in edge, IoT, AI, any tech space has nothing to do with technology. It's business case first. Is there a reason to add risk and complexity to my life? And second, it's people, stakeholders. People are your greatest asset, and then next to that is your data. And people can be tricky. The old IT, OT, LOB thing. So who owns what and whatnot, a lot of different cultural kind of views, whatnot. So as you start building out and focus on outcomes, so first and foremost, look for the business case. Don't just think about, the cost cutting stuff. Look at how you can reinvent. I was with a major payments processor a few years back, and I knew Square really disrupted, this company. And we were having an IoT conversation, and I planned this, and because what I was going to say at the end, the whole conversation was like, oh man, Square really hurt us, and we don't want that to happen again. And I'm like, well, okay, so what are you thinking you're doing? And it was kind of spinning or whatever. It was the innovator's dilemma. And at the end, I'm like, hey guys, I got to run, but have you thought about when machines start making payments? And that blew their minds. And the fact that blew their minds is exactly why Square happened to you. And so it's you've got to, as you think about the ecosystem, architect properly so that you don't preclude yourself from a network effect with other businesses. Of course, you want some stickiness, so focus on that. Folks like what we're doing from a ZEDEDA standpoint, we're almost like kind of VMware Tanzu in principle, but for that outside the data center edge, so very complementary in that sense, because we can support legacy workloads. So that's other things. You can't just throw away everything. We can run your existing SCADA app or point of sale system in a VM, and then you can spin up modern AI workloads in a container right next to it, out there in the wild. This is important too. So it's architect for scale. Focus on open. Surround yourself with really good domain experts and folks that have necessarily unique hardware and software, and versus the reinventors. Get out of your own headspace, and start to look at where you can transform, but also start small. If you architect properly, you don't have to have all the answers today. You just focus on some quick wins, some business outcomes. You let it grow. You start creating a flywheel effect with the ecosystem and go from there. But don't architect yourself in a corner, because you are basically in a dead end.
Yeah, that's great advice, and that's a great way to wrap this up. For a long time, we've studied digital transformation at Futurum Research, and I've written numerous books about it. And as I've done all this, one of the commonalities I always find is that the culture is really what enables the shift in technology. So having that fundamental belief, in this case, that the edge and the data at the edge and IoT is going to be able to help you transform your business. When you have that belief rooted, then you can start to take steps, and it's all about taking those steps and realizing that the technology journey is part of the business's transformation journey. But the idea of overnight transformation and disruption of your own models is very rarely going to be able to be realized successfully. It's just too much. But when the company fundamentally has an analytics culture, or fundamentally has a transformational culture, and realizes the power, that oftentimes really does become something that everybody can root around and leverage to drive success. Jason, thank you so much for joining us here at the 6.5 Summit. It's great to learn about ZEDEDA, a very interesting company. I look forward to joining you again in August. You'll have a little event, and everyone can keep in touch with my social. You'll see it. You'll see me posting about it there. But for now, I got to let you run. I'll let you get back to work
I'm
or
just gonna
whatever
go
it is
play.
you're doing.
I don't actually work. I just play
You
music.
you don't work. Yeah, yeah. Well, you know a lot about IoT and Edge, but no, Jason, thank you so much. Thanks everybody tuning into this session, and we'll see you in the next session really soon.
Thank you.